Hello, I am extremely elated and honored to be here speaking in front of all of you. I think I've had such a hyphenated career at such a young age in my life. It feels so surreal, and I think it's safe to say that every frame, every fragment of this career has led me to some sort of frame, which I didn't know I was going to see, but I still did. A few years ago, I was invited to be a speaker on a panel in England alongside senior New York Times journalists and BBC journalists. And somebody in the audience asked me, well, why did you choose the profession you chose? And without thinking, I said, well, because I wanted to be famous. Because that's what a young person like me at the age of 20 wanted to do. I didn't care about creating good art. I didn't care about my craft. I just thought of being famous. But in hindsight, if I were to go back, I think I'd answer it slightly differently. I think I didn't actually do it because I wanted the fame. I think I did it because I wanted to be seen more than the fame. What if I told you that being delusional is a superpower? I know it sounds crazy, but think about it, that every creative, every artist, every journalist, every entrepreneur in this world has believed in something that wasn't real, that existed in a dream and then manifested into a reality. Think of Steve Jobs, for example. He believed in the iPhone before anyone saw the need for it. And I think I had mine. I think I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't know where I was going to end up in life. But I knew it'll be somewhere. And why do I say I didn't know it? Because growing up, life threw a lot of challenges at me. I grew up in a small town in India where the idea of being an openly gay poet or a journalist who has lived abroad, worked abroad was next to impossible. I was subjected to a complex view of names, identities, gestures. Homophobia was very prominent and prevalent all my life, though. And that kind of molded me in a shell where I think before I could even develop a voice, I had lost that voice. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I changed schools, just kept going from one school to another, thinking in this new school, people would not know my name, people would not remember who I am, but my past followed me like a ghost to every school I went to. And I was exasperated. I was like, I've had enough of this. But it just didn't leave me. And then slowly, I think I developed a habit of reading. And I think I was a good reader in my class. All the teachers would ask me to read. So I thought, okay, that maybe could be a career, but I was too unrealistic. And then years later, I found poetry. And I think poetry for me was the best kind of delusion. It gave me an opportunity to articulate everything, all the angst that I had inside of me. And it made me realize that I can do something that animals and plants cannot do, which is articulate what I'm feeling, what I've gone through. And I think my bullying in a way kind of helped me get resilient very early on in my life. To share an instance with you, I used to, when I was younger in school, and I think I used to go out in the morning for morning walks. And I think one morning I was just out there as myself, and there was this senior in the school who I used to see at the tuition. And he saw me, and him and his friends picked me up in a car. They abducted me almost. They took me somewhere, and then they started beating me. And I didn't know what was happening to me. And I remember begging them to stop what they were doing. I remember begging them to stop because I was bleeding. and they didn't stop. And I think that was the day, I think I must be in the ninth class, and for a boy as young as that, I wouldn't wish that to any person to go through. And I think that was the day I remember that I do not want to die like a nobody. I want to learn that there is everything in this world, and I needed to get some talent because I know, I mean, as they say, it's an old saying that if you're gay and not talented, you're just gay. So I was like, okay, I'd rather also be talented. So I kind of worked towards it. And poetry happened, and I had to learn everything about it. Like, I have not been trained in poetry. I think I'm going to be a published author of 3 books soon. So I think which is something I had not imagined. And I had to teach myself the ways. I had to teach myself what goes inside the book, what goes outside the book, what's typesetting, how a cover is made. I had to learn how not just to write a book, but also sell the book. Because I think a writer's job is not just limited to writing, but it's also selling the work, pitching it to publishers. And I think that was the biggest kind of delusion, because at the age of 19, I thought somebody would be interested in my poetry that I was writing on Tumblr. I thought, okay, somebody might see this. And what unfolded was radio silence that I got from publishers, from people. And at first, I kind of was bothered. I kind of let it get to me. Because I was like, okay, am I not worthy enough? Am I not good enough? Because everybody kept saying that to me growing up in my life, that, you're going to be a nobody, you're going to become nothing, you're good for nothing. And I thought, maybe they're right. But then that didn't let me stop. That didn't stop me. So I kept swimming in the water, not knowing where I would end up. And one thing always led to another. I remember when I started writing poetry, my mother was perplexed. She told me that this cannot be a career. I remember she would show me bank jobs and railway jobs every morning, and she'd tell me, why don't you apply for this? Because the neighbor's son has applied for this. And I'm like, but I'm not the neighbor's son. I'm not going to follow the same trajectory that the neighbor's son has followed. Give me a break. So it just kept happening. And I think it took me years to kind of nourish that voice, bring it to a more nuanced stage. And after a few years, I remember journalism came into my life. And journalism, in a way, was interlinked with my activism and with my poetry that I was already doing. So by that time, I had already started advocating for queer inclusion and queer rights in South Asia. I was already working with various organizations at a young age. And when journalism happened, I think I didn't actually thought I would ever be a journalist. I think I always say I'm an accidental journalist. Because I didn't have a choice but to become that catalyst, to be able to tell the stories of all those people who were around me, all those queer people, trans people during COVID. Because I felt that the mainstream media wasn't amplifying their voices, they weren't being platformed, whether they were stories of murders, whether they were stories of conversion therapy, discrimination, hatred, they weren't being platformed, they weren't being championed as any other story would be. And that is what made me passionate for inclusion, because I think inclusion is about what? Inclusion is about having different voices, different perspectives, not just the way people are or the way people look, but it is also different opinions, just different people with different lives, lived experiences, the way that they live their lives under one roof. So I started writing for publications, and I remember it was very challenging at first because nobody would have given me that space to write those stories of, let's say, a transgender person experienced violence or a queer person going through something. So nobody would initially give me that space. And I struggled to actually get to that stage where I was able to kind of say that, listen, I am this person and I want to write about this story because I believe in this story, even if your audience is not going to read this story. And it was a battle for a couple of years. And then I remember I wrote my first story. And I got money for it, though, which I thought I will never get money, because people said, who will give money to a writer? But I slowly realized that by writing, I could also make money, and I could also do what I like doing. I could champion, because journalism was like wings to my pre-existing work. It gave me a more stronger voice. And I went on to something else. I said, okay, enough of writing, I want to do more. So I thought of going abroad, I thought of I'll take a risk again. I went out again and did a master. And while I was doing that master's, I remember I was having a very nonchalant conversation with somebody, and they said that in this country you can actually phone people. And I was like, wow. I picked up my phone, found someone's number who happened to be a senior producer at the BBC, and I phoned this person. And I think this woman was gobsmacked. I phoned her and I said, and it was the most narcissistic call. I phoned her and I said, I'm this person from India who just come here. I've done this, this, and this. And I have this idea that I want to execute. I don't know how to execute this idea though. And I said, I just want to have a meeting with you. I'm sure she must have thought I'm mad. But she agreed to meet me. And I explained my idea to her. I said, I want to do a story. I want to do a series on men's mental health. But from an intersectional point, I want to do this story so that it champions the lives of people that we do not hear from every day. Whether it's a trans man, whether it's a gay man who's single and old, and so like different set of stories. And I think she really liked the idea. I didn't know how I was going to execute this idea, but I just said one thing to her. I said, this series is interlinked with my own identity and expression and everything that I have been seeing ever since I moved to the UK. And this woman says, you know what, do it like a 6-part series. I was shocked. My first concern was, how am I going to balance doing this while I'm a uni student? But that's what I tell people. Go out, get opportunities, no matter what. Just grab opportunities because they're not going to come to you. And I think you've got to be a certain sense of delusional in order to be able to do those things. Because of course, if I was thinking in straight lines, which I would never, but if I were, I think I would have succumbed to all these voices of people telling me that I shouldn't do it or I shouldn't do anything. But I also realized that one thing always led to another. How when I remember doing that podcast series, that I had to compromise a lot for that podcast series. So I had to research the guests, write the script, I had to edit the audio, record the audio, and I had to do basically everything in a nutshell. And I did not get a remuneration. I mean, generally people do get remunerations, I didn't get it. And as a student, I had two options, and I think this is what all you students also need to know, that there are times in life where we need to make those conscious choices. We need to know that whether we do this thing as a stepping stone, or will we get something better out of it, or do we just not do it? So I saw that opportunity as a stepping stone. I thought I would get something amazing out of it. Again, I didn't know what that amazing thing was going to be. But I remember that gig helped me land a full-time job as a producer at the BBC. Because I remember I went for the job interview and the person had already listened to my podcast and he said, I know you. And I said, oh wow, I'm famous. Everybody knows me. But in fact, he had listened to my podcast. He really loved the idea how I brought this wealth of intersectionality to the table, of diaspora voices, brown voices, queer voices, voices that are overlooked in a Western context. And of course, the journey wasn't the easiest. There were times I experienced radio silence, as I said. There were doors that refused to be open. It was very difficult to be working in a newsroom where I was the only person who looked and spoke like me, right? There were preconceived notions, there were biases that this is how Indians are, this is what an Indian person is like, and I did not fit any of those norms. So they were a bit startled that, why are you not like the Indian we have seen or we have known? And I'm like, but this is not the India that I live in today is. I don't know what version of India you have seen, this is not the version of India I come from. And then things kept happening and things also became difficult. I'd say I'd use the word difficult because things were difficult. But I kept going. And there was a time where I thought that I should just give this up and I should just do whatever, do anything. But I didn't stop. I think that delusion alone is not enough. I think when we are thinking of something, of course, all of us must have dreams, all of us must have ideas, and every night in our bedrooms we're thinking, oh, I wish I get this. I wish I get this opportunity because somebody else has gotten it. I mean, I do this a lot. I'm always looking at other people and I'm like, okay, why has this person gotten this? Why have I not gotten this? But I fail to acknowledge that the things that I have always gotten have always been better than what I had expected. And that happens because I paired my delusion with action. And I think that is what people need to do. You need to pair your delusion with action, with persistence. You can't just be delusion in a room at night saying, I want this and not putting the hard work. You need to work hard for the things you want. I think I, of course, pushed myself out of my comfort zone. I think the bullying at large that I experienced as a young child pushed me into a shell where I was afraid of talking to people. I was afraid of talking about my life. I had no interest. I was shy. I didn't have a purpose. And I let go of all those things. And I started fresh. I went out, networked, introduced myself to people, talked to people. I was never afraid to ask people for opportunities, any upcoming opportunities. And one thing just kept leading to another. I think I am so grateful to have met such incredible people in my life that I never felt the need to stay silent or stay shut. And I think I have been accepted in the best possible way for who I am as a person. And I think even though life throws roadblocks and stones at you, I think the best thing is how we can develop smart delusion is I've got two rules. I mean, if it works, it works. But you got to know how, you got to have two rules. We all experience failure. We all experience radio silence, rejection, and I think we need to know that that's not the end of everything. The world is not collapsing at our feet. You face a failure, you face a rejection, you give yourself the time to sink in fact, drown into it, and then emerge out of it. Get better, and just chase after the thing that you want with your life. And then the second, I think, is something that somebody said to me very early on in my life, which was to develop that sense of inner knowing, that no matter what the outside world tells you, what you know about yourself on the inside is the only thing that matters. So for the longest time, I felt that I should succumb to the voices that kept telling me I'm not good enough or not worthy enough, but I didn't. And I think if you're sitting here with an idea today that you think is big enough or too unrealistic or overtly ambitious, I think you should just go after it. I think you should just be delusional because you have nothing to lose. Thank you.